Good evening, everybody. Hi, guys.
Hi, Sergey. Hi, Oleg. Good to see you.
Good to see you all. So we're
Good
colleagues.
to see you all.
Yep. We're volunteers. We work for an agency well created called Protect Ukraine Now. And our one of many objectives is to analyze the level of military aid provided to Ukraine. Two of my colleagues will provide some details behind the current state of military aid. So since their inaction of Supplemental, if I'm not mistaken, April 25, how much aid did Ukraine received so far in dollar terms?
In dollar terms, as of April 25, just a second.
Since the April 25, till now.
Since the April 25, so Ukraine received 2.2, almost 2 billion, just 50 million above 2 billion.
1.9.
I think it's, what about this latest 150 million? It's declared.
I think it has been announced but not delivered yet.
Okay. I agree.
So
then.
it's around $2 billion.
Million.
So since the last April, around $2 billion. But the law called for close to 10 billion. Am I mistaken?
It close
7.
Actually. There are about 8 in humanitarian assistance and then about 20 in various military aid. There are 3 programs, FMF, USAI, PDA. Some of it is going to be long-term. So altogether, it's about 20 billion.
20 billion altogether. But in terms of a short term, that's what matters right now. Because Ukraine is fighting right now. All long term is a real long term. So in terms of what's been promised short term, how much was on the table in April?
So that's a great question. PDA,
Yes,
which is always going to be short term because it doesn't include any manufacturing. PDA was kept at $7.8 billion, including Israel and Taiwan. So we can only guess how much of it is actually going to be for Ukraine. We would say about 5 for sure, but we cannot be confident that of the amount actually going to Ukraine through PDA program. As far as USAI and FMF programs are concerned, they can be either long or short-term usage, and whether or not they're going to be used one way or another is up to the administration. In the past, we have seen USAI being used strictly for long-term assistance.
Let's look at the big picture here for a sec. In terms of the entire war since 24th of February 2022, can we say how much military aid crossed the border? Not what's been promised, not what's been committed, but technically crossed the Ukrainian border. How much in dollar terms Ukraine had received?
No more than 27 billions. This is a higher estimate.
So around $27 billion. So all those discussions about $200 billion that Ukraine had received is just a baloney.
Correct.
It's a slight overestimation.
Well, it's overpromise and under-deliver. That's what I would say. No, there's not an overestimation. It's an overpromise. How much USAI, the long term, has been committed? Do we know?
We know it's 24.9, almost 25 billion that were committed, and about half of that, or 13.7 billion, were contracted by this time, and 32.7 were appropriated.
What does that mean? What do those terms mean?
That means that the contracts were signed over 2.5 years for the total of 13.7 billion, slightly less than 14 billion. That is what was signed. We can assess that roughly over this 2.5 years, the contracts for about 500 million per month are signed. Committed 24.9, almost 25 billion, almost twice as much as contracted. And almost 8 billion remained not committed yet. That is
So
something that can
basically,
be
the way I
spent on.
understood you, so 8 billion is free floating, so they have no idea how they're going to spend it.
In fact, the
Correct.
Congress was not yet notified that this money is going to be used.
Okay, so it's the Congress has been notified. It's basically free floating. They have some time left. By them in White House has some time left to make those decisions. Okay. Then you said 25 billion been committed. So they notified the Congress and they have a clear vision how this money going to spend. And
That's
out of
correct.
this 25, about half, 13 billion, already find the contractual manufacturer, whoever going to
Exactly.
manufacture those items.
Those funds went under contract.
Went under contract. Do we have any idea what's the duration from the items went under contract till they're going to deliver? In general terms, we're talking about weeks, months, years. Like, what is the time scale here?
My assessment is it takes years to sign a contract. It takes years in a queue. It could take from like faster or slower, but it in general years. And it take probably a year or more to manufacture. So we're talking years.
So the time here, the time scale is here is years. And from everything been committed so far in the USAI, how much has been delivered over 3 years of the war?
So as we know, some of these items that were contracted on USAI are present only in USAI. They were not present in PDA, and that thus we can assess how fast or what percentage of the contract were delivered to Ukraine. For example, with M1117 Guardian, this is like an APC, if you will. Uh, it was contracted for 250 of them to repair and send to Ukraine. It was contracted back in 2022, in November 2022, so it's a year and a half now. And we heard of is that we saw like a small video with one of those with Ukrainians nearby, and the message that was delivered for Battalion Skala, and that means that the battalion doesn't have capacity for more than 40 of those. So it's 40 out of 250. You can assess what percentage is that. It's very small. It's like 1/6 at best, despite 1.5 years into this contract. Other systems like Vampire or APKWS, we know that only 14 Vampires were sent to Ukraine, and we don't know how many were contracted by, but based on the price, there should be much more than that.
In terms of dollar amount, we're talking under $2 billion.
So from all those long-term commitment, Ukraine had received $2 billion from USAI, and the overall help, military aid from the US is 27 billion.
Correct.
That's correct.
Do we have any idea how much Europe is donating for the military aid ballpark? Is it more than the United States? Is it less? Is it about the same?
Let's compare Finland. Finland, in the last 30 days, committed to send, or actually sent, $160 million worth of equipment. And the United States committed to send $150 million worth of equipment.
But this is a one random situation. In the duration of this war, the claims been made, mostly by the Republicans, that United States carrying the undue burden in terms of helping Ukraine, and Europe is not assisting as much. Is it a true statement, at least in terms of military aid?
I don't think it is true. Let's look at Germany. Germany in this year committed to send to Ukraine 14 billion worth of equipment in United States dollars, or 11 billion in euros. And United States sent over 2.5 years at most 27 billion worth of munitions. So Germany in this year alone is going to send half of what United States shipped over 2.5 years.
So basically, Europe spending at least as much as the United States or even more. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And this is confirmed by the number of munitions per type that we can have at protectukrainenow.org. You can see what was sent by Europe, what was sent by United States, and compare. And you can see all the numbers are in Europe's favor, not in United States' favor.
So the statement that the United States carrying undue burden and fulfills their obligations more than anybody else is simply not true. Europe is participating at least as much as the United States, if not more.
This is correct. And if we look at trends, Europe is increasing the amount of aid given to Ukraine. And unfortunately, with the United States, the trend is the opposite.
So Ukraine, the United States is decreasing the military aid to Ukraine as we speak. What's left? How much assets and military assets had left under the supplemental in coffins for Biden to spend right now, for the White House to spend?
How much is available to...
How much is available? That's a good way to put it, yes.
Let's not forget about 3.9 billion that were not spent from 2022. So we have at least almost 4 billion in presidential drawdown authority from 2022 that was not spent.
So you're saying the prior year, about $4 billion has been spent, and it's still available, and it's still available.
That is correct.
Okay.
And Pentagon accepted that.
That's a tricky question. It should be available.
Okay.
We would not know until the year is over, and we'll see how much was actually delivered.
It was confirmed by a Department of State, Department of Defense spokesperson, I believe General Pat Ryder, confirmed that it is available.
So there's $4 billion left from the last carryover from the last year. I'm not going to ask questions because you guys have no idea what's in the White House brain, collective White House brain, why they never spend this $4 billion, but there's $4 billion carryovers. Okay, I got that part. How much we have left available from this supplement?
At minimum, 3 billions, assuming that there is some part is available for Israel and Taiwan. Overall, it's probably almost 6 billion.
Okay. So Ukraine still potentially has around $6 billion for immediate aid known as a PDA. Do we know anything about Israel, as we're talking about? That Israel has received any PDA assistance from the supplemental yet?
We haven't seen any announcements, but to be completely honest, we're not following Israel nearly as close.
But it's interesting. So we haven't noticed any announcement because you guys, I will pick it up because they're depleting the availability of Ukraine. So it's related to what we're doing. But we never seen any announcement that Israel have received any PDA, and yet we have, 2 months passed since they're signing the law?
Yes.
Speaking of signing the law, if I'm not mistaken, the provision 504 calls for providing strategy, clearly delineated strategy of prosecuting this war. That was a big accomplishment by Republicans in the House. Did we get this document from the White House? I believe 45 days had passed.
So this section is part of the bipartisan bill passed by the United States Congress. And yes, 45 days are over, and there's still no strategy as we understand. This section requires the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense within 45 days. Again, we're over on June 8th. And they would require to provide strategy regarding the United States support for Ukraine against aggression by the Russian Federation. And this is a great document. It's supposed to close a lot of loopholes and a lot of misunderstandings. And also it's going to help if implemented, is going to help all advocates here in the United States against unbased attacks, such as, for example, Ukraine is getting open check or there's no strategy, and so on. To highlight this strategy requires establishing specific and achievable objectives, define and prioritize United States national security interests, and include metrics to be used to measure progress of these objectives. So a lot of good stuff. And if we were to have this sort of strategy, we could be able to take, for example, the military aid we know was delivered and compare it to actual needs of the war. So and this would be again so because these objectives would have to come with a required list of resources and associated cost of obtaining them. And it will also would require, again, Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense to report on any munition that was not delivered to Ukraine, though it could result in meaningful battlefield gains. So again, this strategy is set to help us close this gap between how much is delivered and how much is necessary for Ukraine to achieve objectives that supposedly will be defined by the executive branch.
So as of now, despite their clearly defined request, this is the law by the United States Congress, passed by both chambers, signed by the President, that law required to provide within 45 days clearly delineated strategy. There's some definition what it means. So that section of the law hasn't been fulfilled by the White House.
Not yet.
Okay, let's talk about the actual items being provided to Ukraine. Let's start with Abrams tanks. So if not mistaken, Abrams tanks were provided fall last year, around September, October. Am I correct?
That is correct, yes.
That was on the heels of the collapse counteroffensive. So it basically was 3 months too late. I've seen an interesting report, mostly by independent analysts, that at least a dozen of those Abrams have already been destroyed. And the rest, and the overall, if I'm not mistaken, the only 31 tanks, 31 units been provided. So the remaining bunch has been pulled back from the front lines and they're not participating in the war right now. Do you guys hear anything along those lines? Do we know the status of the Abrams tanks? Are they used right now?
That is a very interesting question. There was a message that I saw after 5 lost Abrams tanks. There was this recall from the front line, but as you heard, there's 12 now lost. They're probably used on the front line. Yes, that is correct. They were lost in the battle. I saw interviews with the tankers, the crews. The problem that was there is that they are considered such a high price for Russians that they don't hesitate to use all sorts of munitions against those Abrams tanks, including ATGM, anti-tank guided missiles, drones, artillery, anything.
So you're saying there's nothing wrong with those tanks, just Russians put a high bounty on each tank. They're literally paying the soldiers, and people just hunting them like there's no tomorrow. Is that what's happening?
I cannot confirm if they are literally paid or not, but they behave like they are paid, like they are extremely valuable targets, and they try to eliminate them with every possible means, including mining. And because the tanks are very heavy and Ukraine doesn't have too many evacuation vehicles, when this tank gets explodes in a mine, it's impossible to bring it back behind the front line and repair.
So the question is remain, are they still needed? Do Ukrainians need Abrams tanks? Do they need tanks at all right now?
Ukrainians do use tanks. Whether Ukrainians need Abrams tanks, it's a good question. From a tank perspective, it's good tank. There's nothing wrong with it, but Ukrainians much better operating with Bradley's infantry fighting vehicles. And Bradley is not the only option. There is also Swedish CV90, which are also very good, great machines.
So let's switch gears and talk about planes. So if I'm not
Like,
mistaken, no F-16, no any kind of planes, in fact, been delivered by the United States. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I lost the question.
I
There was a
said there's
question,
no
actually.
single military aircraft been delivered by the United States to Ukraine. Is this correct?
That is correct.
This is correct.
Well, there's
We only hear rumors of future deliveries.
Okay.
let me correct actually. The 20 transport helicopters Mi-17 were delivered. Those technical aircraft, those are not just combat aircrafts. They're
Okay.
just transport aircrafts.
So there are some transport helicopters. Okay, got it. But in terms of military planes, jets, fighter jets, hasn't been delivered any. And yet Europe committed some number, I think around 60, is a ballpark correct?
Yes.
Yes, around 60 F-16s, right? Has they
Correct.
been delivered?
There was no any message showing that any of them were delivered.
What's the holdup? Do we know?
Right now, they are pointing fingers at the lack of trained pilots on Ukraine side.
Do
They
you think?
basically say there's no trained pilots. The F-16 training programs are getting canceled, delayed, etc., because they are so old aircrafts that, like, many countries don't need F-16 training programs anymore, which is why they are closing those programs, and Ukraine could not get their place for the Ukrainian pilots to get trained on F-16s.
So that's basically in whose court is the ball? So I guess the people who are training the pilots, I guess. All right. So,
Yes,
but the planes themselves, they're quite old.
that is
Are they
correct.
still needed? Is it like better than nothing, or is just a liability for Ukrainians at this point?
It depends on the usage. It depends how Ukraine plans to use those planes. Uh, of course, any plane is better than no plane, so there will be some usage for those planes, even if it's the bait for the Russian Iskander on their airfield. Of course, I'm joking here. What F-16s could potentially be used for is for air defense, to protect from Shahed drones, to protect from um, cruise missiles, to hunt for them in the places where the terrain elevation doesn't allow for ground-based radars to detect those missiles and shoot them down. That is one possible kind of low-hanging fruit for those F-16s.
So they're
Whether there
basically going
will
to
be
be
other,
used, but can they be used against the gliding bombs? So Russians right now have a huge upper hand using the gliding bombs. What's the English term for them? Gliding bombs? How do they call it?
glide bombs, yes, it's
Yeah,
an English
gliding bombs.
term,
All right.
yes.
So the Russians basically modifying their garbage, the bombs they have, an endless supply. They're modifying them. They've been using all variety of them from 500 kilos to 1,500 kilos and what have you. And that's a huge, huge advantage to Russians. Can F-16 shut down those planes who are dropping the bombs?
It really depends on the situation, but most likely they will not be able to approach the front line efficiently and safely, most importantly, because of less advanced radars on those F-16s that will be spotted before they can be effective against those airplanes.
I've read some
Uh,
interesting article that United States right now contemplating to cancel the maintenance of F-18s, I believe.
They
So
are pretty good
they're
planes.
claiming that they're spending close to $1.5 billion a year to maintain them, and they want to just cancel them all. It's not been decided yet, but it's on the chopping block. Are they useful for Ukrainians if they're up for grabs?
Absolutely. Yes. F-16s are, I would say, not the best fighter plane, but F-18s are definitely very, very good long-range fighter plane. They have much better range than F-16s. The reason being is that they have more powerful radar that is just physically bigger and more powerful, more advanced than those that are in the old European F-16s. They can really be on par, at least, with Russian airplanes. Same with missiles. F-18 can shoot missiles called AIM 260, JATM. Those are newly developed missiles, long-range missiles. They have at least 200 kilometers range, and they can be a serious threat for Russian fighter jets.
So we just established, and I'm not saying rumors, I actually have articles which back it up. There is a discussion on the Capitol Hills to cancel maintenance of F-18 and scrap them. They haven't decided it yet. In fact, their Navy wants to keep them. They like them better than F-35. So there's some internal scramble, but the general idea to switch to F-35s and scrap F-18s. So potentially, Ukraine has some aircrafts, military aircrafts they can rely on, but that would require a miracle for them to get their hands on it.
Absolutely. Plus a new
All right.
training. Because
Plus
they have
another couple of years of training, of course. You have to train not only pilots, but you have to train the on the ground personnel and what have you. All right, all right. In terms of artillery shells, where do we stand? Does Ukraine get enough, half of enough, more than enough? What's the status of the artillery shell delivery to Ukraine?
So on artillery shells, there were an article that United States delivered more than 4 million of artillery shells to Ukraine. And I would say this is definitely a huge number. This is more than any other country delivered to Ukraine. This is extremely important. But whether it's enough or not, that's multiple times less than Russia used their stockpile received from Iran, China. Well, I don't have data to back the
North
China,
Korea.
but at least North Korea. And we don't know how many, like what's the ratio, but it's definitely not on Ukrainian side. It's like 1 to 5, maybe 1 to 4. We don't know precisely. Last time I heard was 1 to 5.
So the ratio of expended artillery shells is 1 to 5 toward the Russians. So for each 5 artillery shells spent by Russians, Ukrainians are using about 1.
That is correct.
I've heard that Ukrainian guns supplied by the West is more precise. Therefore, despite their lack of balance, is about the same. Is that true?
When they were new, that was true, absolutely. But the thing is, in order to keep them precise, you need to change barrels every couple thousand shots. It depends on the type of artillery shell. It depends on how much propellant you put into the barrel, into the gun. But that's not happening. Ukraine has very old and very used barrels, which made those artillery shells very imprecise. It's not matter that much if you're using cluster munitions like deep pick artillery shells, which is a very scarcity in Ukraine.
And does the United States have those cluster ammunition artillery shells?
Yes, absolutely. At least we hope that we still have them because they are being scrapped as we speak. There used to be 4 million of them, but in April 2022, there was a contract signed with Expal US that uh, to demilitarize the cluster munitions, including artillery shells. And those millions of artillery shells are getting destroyed since then. And rumors say that there's not much left.
So hold on, am I hearing you correctly? So you're saying Ukraine in dire straits, needing those cluster munitions, cluster shells, and the United States is scrapping them, meaning destroying them on purpose, and yet paying for the companies who are providing the service, rather than sending that very needed munitions to Ukrainian front line. Am I hearing you correctly?
That is correct.
What's the rationale behind that?
So during the war in Iraq, there was a lot of cluster munitions used at that time, and sometimes United States soldiers were passing through the areas which were bombarded by cluster munitions, and there were unexpected and unpleasant casualties from own unexploded ordnance. And for that reason, the United States decided to either develop a new cluster munition that will not be that will not have as huge dud rate. Dud rate is a rate of unexploded munition in percentage, less than 1%, or destroy those munitions which will not satisfy this. And because the newer generation cluster munitions were never developed, that is why the United States kind of commit to this decision to destroy it.
But that had to do with American military policy. Americans can afford to scrap perfectly good shells and build new ones, but why not to send them to Ukraine? Send them all, save some money.
That is absolutely a great question, especially given that Ukraine, as we know and as we heard from spokesperson of Department of Defense, is using cluster munitions very responsibly outside of populated areas, and each area where cluster munition is used, it's marked for future prioritized demilitarization. And those areas where this is used and where potentially unexploded ordnance is, it's contaminated with mines, with other unexploded artillery shells, non-cluster. It's contaminated with Russian cluster munitions, which has huge dud rates. Like it's very contaminated with unexploded ordnance and etc. So it's not adding much.
So let's look at the big picture for a second. Ukraine is retreating, slowly but surely. The front line is gradually, very slowly, literally inches per day, maybe kilometers per week, but gradually moving toward west. It is hard to make a statement that Ukraine is winning this war. Ukraine is definitely not winning. And yet, United States is not delivering what's been committed. So we have billions of dollars been allocated but not delivered. And that's somehow the policy of this White House. I don't know why it's the policy, but it's clearly, if the goal is to support Ukraine, Ukraine is losing, and we have assets to support it, and those assets is not used, at least yet, and probably going to be wasted by the end of the year. What we as United States citizens can do to, if anything we can do to change the situation, is anything in our power to support Ukraine?
Well, first, I should add that in addition to holding back critical equipment, critical munitions, we also, the United States, the White House implemented restriction on using long-range artillery against Russian territory. So Ukraine cannot use ATACMS or any other long-range equipment from United States to shoot at military targets, airports, that, for example, have jets that deploy those glide bombs we just talked about. Ukraine cannot shoot at oil depots or any other targets.
Oleg, wasn't lifted like a month ago?
It only concerned the area around Kharkiv.
And so it was lifted just for one specific section of front line?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, 30 kilometer. That's not long enough.
30
That's not deep
kilometer
enough.
deep or 30 kilometer wide?
30 kilometer deep near the Kharkiv.
That decision
Only
was
near the Kharkiv and only 30 kilometer deep.
that was in
Yes.
response to devastating attacks on the city, and the Biden administration decided to help that particular section of the front.
And Sullivan claimed that if similar devastating attack will be held against other Ukrainian cities, then there will be a lifting restriction in those places, but only after Russia will try to attack Ukraine.
That makes no sense at all. So yesterday they just bombed the crap out of the children's hospital in Kiev. But because Kiev not on the front line, the restriction is not going to be lifted because the attack made on Kiev is too far from Kiev. That makes no sense. I mean, okay, that's just ridiculous. Anyway, goes back to my question. What can we, people who support Ukrainians in their struggle, what the people of goodwill of the United States who are on Ukrainian side, what can we do to help Ukraine right now?
The same thing we always talk about, call your senators, call your representatives, and ask very specific things that need to happen in order to help current situation. Right now, this is lifting any restrictions on using long-range weapons against Russian territory. The second very important thing is air defense. There are older Patriot systems that we have taken off service. By we, I mean the United States. We do not need those units any longer. They were written off between 1995 and 2005. And we can definitely find at least 10 batteries that can go to Ukraine right now.
So basically the message, if we call the senator, the Russians destroying the children's hospitals, and we in the United States have obsolete and good for scraps air defense systems, which we can send Ukraine. By the way, we have a budget for it. Why don't we send it? Is that the message?
That's correct.
So basically, whoever hears here in the United States, by the way, they don't have to be citizens. They can be just permanent residents, right?
Any person who is a permanent resident can call and express their concerns. They should never misrepresent themselves as citizens, but aside from that, they have a full right to voice their concerns.
And the concern right now, United States has, and we know that for a fact, right, you guys, has plenty of anti-aircraft defense and anti-missiles defense systems, which can be sent to Ukraine to save the children of Ukraine.
That is correct, yes.
To the
In
best
fact,
of our ability, given that we do not have access to classified information, as much as you can get from sources available to the general public, this is correct.
So basically the message is simple. Stop murdering children. Give them something to protect the sky of Ukraine. That's a simple message. We don't have to be military strategists to send that message. Give them the chance to protect themselves.
yes, and I would like to add one more. Currently, there is an electoral campaign going on, and we're finding a way to ask current White House administration and Democratic representatives to get more aid to Ukraine, because that is to the majority of, like, in their power, especially in the White House. But there is also an opportunity right now to reach out to the Republican Party representatives and presumptive nominee Trump, and ask what's the policy on Ukraine in his opinion is. He often tries to avoid talking directly about what is the plan, as he mentioned, to stop the war. What exactly that plan is. That is a chance to be heard and make sure that he knows that a lot of the Ukraine supporters who are going to vote for Trump actually matter. For them, it matters what will be the policy on Ukraine. And if you have access to donors of President Trump or President Biden, please voice this concern as well for both of them.
Right. Thanks, guys, for your time and for everything you're doing for Ukraine. And the only ask here for people who hear us, if you guys support in Ukraine, it's a very simple 5 minutes commitment, right? Call your senators, request to give more aid to save the children. It's simple.
If you don't know how to reach out to your senators and representatives, you can find a form on protectukrainenow.org. If you go to Call to Congress webpage, you can enter your address. We do not collect that information. We're only using it for lookup, and the form will find for you the contact information for your 2 senators and 1 representative.
Ask your friends, ask your relatives who support Republicans, Democrats, or even who are independent. Let them ask their candidates they support and ask them, what is the plan on Ukraine?
Well, see you next time.
Thank you, Sergey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Oleg.